My name is Dennis Savanowski, and I'm a historian here in Alameda, California. I publish the local newspaper, the Alameda Sun. And as a historian, I'm always interested in surprising people. And most people are very, very surprised to learn that the business behind me, the oil changers, there was once a railroad station here. And it was a very important railroad station because it was the first stop in Alameda that the very first transcontinental railroad train took on September 6th, 1869. The train pulled in about 10 p.m. Leland Stanford, one of the big four, was aboard the train, along with Alfred A. Cohen, the man who built this railroad in 1864. And the idea here was the railroad tracks ran right along a street that we now call Tilden Way, and then right across Park Street, which is the main street here in town, the Tilden Way changes its name to Lincoln Avenue. And as time went on, the train ran all the way down Lincoln Avenue out to a spot on Main Pacific, to a station and a wharf. And this is what happened on September 6, 1869. Cohen and Stanford left Sacramento aboard the train, and they had a problem. And the problem was there was a bridge that went across the Tuolumne River near Lathrop, and the bridge wasn't quite ready. And the problem had an interesting effect where people were here, and I'd like you to picture a small train station with wreaths and flowers and tables with the beer out, ready to go, ready to celebrate the arrival of the train. And when Stanford and Cohen got to this bridge on the Tuolumne River, the bridge wasn't finished yet. And so they made the workers finish the bridge. They had to wait 4 or 5 hours. And so consequently, the train arrived here 4 or 5 hours late. And by the time the train pulled in here, at a historic stop, the first stop in Alameda of the first transcontinental train ever, the beer had all been drunk, the flowers had all withered away because everyone just gave up on the train showing up. And then suddenly, they hear the noise of the train coming, and the train came up the tracks of what is now Tilden Way and stopped here. So I'm holding here a map that my business partner Eric Koss made that shows the route in 1869 of the trains that ran from Sacramento down through Stockton, and then over the Altamont Pass, and then finally here into Alameda. The interesting story about this map is that it shows Niles Canyon, also known as Vallejo Mills. When it was known as Vallejo Mills before 1869, an interesting thing happened. There was an attempt to bring a railroad from San Francisco down through San Jose, through this area here called the Niles Canyon today, and out and up to Sacramento. There was a time when the men building the railroad were first forced to build the first 20 miles out of their own pocket. And when they were not able to do this, when the first 20 miles were not completed here, the entire plan for the railroad to run all the way around up to San Francisco, up the peninsula, was dashed because there was a man who was supposed to get his money at a certain time and was going to use that money to pay his subcontractors, and he discovered that he was not going to get his money. And I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to change something, and I'm going to show you why he didn't get his money. We're looking at the reason, and indeed the very moment, when a decision was made by a man named Charles McLaughlin to not continue the train through Niles Canyon that we see here up to San Francisco. It turns out that he had to build 20 miles of track before he could get any money from the federal government. And he did it or he didn't do it, depending on how you look at the figures. From my point of view, he had only built 17 miles and he wasn't due his money. He did claim with the government inspectors here, and you can see all the government inspectors here, that he did in fact make his 20 miles, but you'll notice the train is on a curve here. And the curve is still there, the hill is still very steep, and now and again, a cow, even today, will fall from the hill from up here onto the track and die. And for this reason, this curve in the railroad tracks is called dead cow curve. And the fact that Charlie McLaughlin walked off the job here at this very spot is given, the reason given is a curse. And a lot of railroad buffs know about the curse of dead cow curve. The dead cow curve, right where the train stopped going to Sacramento, and then because the train stopped going to Sacramento, they had to put another plan into place. And that plan involved two railroads. One we're standing on right now, the San Francisco and Alameda Railroad, and the other across the way, the San Francisco and Oakland Railroad. Because Charles McLaughlin walked off the job here, and because there were men ready and willing to bring the trains into Oakland and Alameda, is the very reason today you cannot take a train from, let's say, from Chicago into San Francisco. You've got to get off the train in Emeryville. And the reason is because the train never went straight into San Francisco, and this goes all the way back to October 1866, when Charlie McLaughlin found out he wasn't going to get his money until January, and he couldn't wait that long, and he walked off the job. He was in charge, and the train stopped going. Eric's map here shows on the bottom, it says Western Pacific to San Jose. Now, the Western Pacific we're talking about here is the one from the 1860s. Later on, in the early 20th centuries, there was a newer Western Pacific Railroad. That's not the one we're talking about. We're talking about the one from the 1860s. There's their plan to go to San Jose and bring the trains up the peninsula to San Francisco. Charlie McLaughlin walks off the job in the middle of Niles Canyon, right in here, which was known as Vallejo Mills at the time, or Alameda Canyon at the time, and the train stopped running here. But as I mentioned, there were men, three of them, A.A. Cohen and Horace Carpentier and Leland Stanford, who were willing to listen to the idea of instead of bringing the trains to San Francisco, bring the trains up first into Alameda and then into Oakland. And this is exactly what happened. They did not complete this track here to the point where they could use it for transcontinental railroad trains, but they did complete the track from Niles to Dakota to San Lorenzo, up through Melrose, and then at first into Alameda with its several stops. September 6, 1869, that very first train showed up here, way too late to enjoy the beer and the sandwiches, and this was the very first time the transcontinental train railroad ever met the waterway on the West Coast. And then just a little over a month later, on November 8th, 1869, the trains began running into Oakland. And in order to have all this happen, they had to build this track all the way down here. And the stops at Elk Grove, if you see the little flag, that meant it was a flag stop. If you were in McConnell's, the train wouldn't stop unless you flagged the train down. Another flag stop at El Campo, another one at Castle, and so on. And then finally, the train ran here, and then up into Alameda, and then into San Francisco a month later or so. And then there's another track that Eric presented here to show that this is the modern day way they go. Instead of going the long way and around the Altamont Pass, they go up along the seashore, or along the bay shore through Martinez and up to San Francisco. So this is a short version. We have a way a very exciting way to share a much longer version of the story of the intrigue and the refusal to pay and the walking off of the job that finally led to Charles McLaughlin's murder in 1883. Behind me is a street named Tilden Way, and the cars now come up this street and on to Lincoln Avenue at Park Street. They come across the Fruitvale Bridge, but there was a time when there was no Fruitvale Bridge before 1902, so from 1864 to 1902, Alameda was a peninsula until they did the estuary and then made Alameda into an island, and that required them to build a bridge at Fruitvale. And the train ran up here, stopped at the station that I mentioned behind me here, and the story of the train that actually starts in 1864 when Cohen built the line, and then ends with our story of a very sad but interesting train crash not 5 days or 6 days after they opened the railroad into Oakland. November 8th, 1869, there was the railroad open, and then on November 14th, on a quiet Sunday morning, there was a horrific train crash between a train coming up from San Leandro and a train going down to San Leandro and on, they hope, to Omaha. However, the man at the switch, it was Sunday morning, he was a train car washer named Barney Kane, and he couldn't read, and he told the engineer of the Central Pacific Railroad train to go ahead, and he did, and about maybe, let's say, a mile or so later, they look up and they see another train coming right at them. There was a train, a San Francisco and Alameda train coming up from San Leandro, and there was a head-on crash, a horrific head-on crash. About 15 people lost their lives. Right behind me here, as I mentioned, is Park Street, and there was an insane asylum here. And A.A. Cohen, who built the railroad, was awakened by the sound of this crash. It was early Sunday morning, as I mentioned, and he saw to it that the insane asylum was cleared out somewhat so they could bring the patients up from the railroad accident. And there are a lot of other stories of intrigue going on here. The murder of Charlie McLaughlin by Jerome Cox years later because Cox never got his money. The Chinese being bought in earlier than most people say they were. The Chinese were working on the railroad already in 1863 and 1864, unlike what you hear. And I want to bring this story to you in two forms. We want to have a longer documentary for what I might call railroad nerds that would be interested in, that would last about an hour or so. And we're going to do a shorter and more precise and more sophisticated documentary about this whole story. And we're going to write a book. Well, actually, I'm going to write a book. I'm writing it right now that covers this entire subject matter. But in order to do this, I talked to a lot of people and asked them would they do this for me for free, and they said no. So I need your help to raise some money. To be precise, in order to get this all done the right way and get everything paid for and everybody paid, and everything to be fair, I need to raise about $80,000. And at the moment, we're at the start line, and so I'm hoping that I can find some individuals or some businesses that would be interested in helping me raise the money, and from this money would come the book. We've already written 7 other books. Actually, we've written 13 books, but the other 6 were for a publisher in London. And we've written 7 other books in the same series, History is All Around Us, and this is going to be part of that. The book will cover all the subject matter from the building of the railroads here in 1863 and 1864 until that train crash on November 14th, 1869, as will the 20-minute more sophisticated film and the hour-long documentary. But again, I would really appreciate any help financially I could get from anyone interested in seeing this project through. And the best way to do this is, I'll give you an easy email to remember. and you can send me an email and tell me you're interested, and we can talk about how you can help. For example, I have a real estate company here in Alameda, and I was very surprised to find out that I opened up an envelope 3 or 4 days ago, and there was a check in there for $500. And I've also got the Port of Oakland supporting me. I'm not quite sure how this is all going to work out, but I showed them my presentation and they're interested in helping. And I also have other historical societies that are interested, but I was hoping to get your help as well. So if there's something you'd like to help with, to help me raise the money to see this through, the longer video, the shorter, more sophisticated documentary, and then the book itself, just pop me an email. It's really easy to remember. It's editor, E-D-I-T-O-R, at AlamedaSun, all one word, ALAMEDASUN.com. Editor at AlamedaSun.com. I'm Dennis Ovanovsky, a local historian who's very interested in seeing this project through. Thank you.